What if I told you that the single greatest threat to your future isn't a nuclear war, a global pandemic, or a political collapse? What if the enemy is already inside the gates, hiding in plain sight as a simple line item on a government balance sheet? Right now, the United States government is spending $892 billion a year, not on defense, not on infrastructure, not on healthcare for you, but purely on interest payments, just the cost of keeping a dying system alive for one more day. Most people call this mismanagement. But history tells a darker story. This isn't a mistake, it is a mathematical sequence, a four-stage cycle that has systematically vaporized three major economies over the last 3 centuries. We are told 2008 was the crash. We are wrong. 2008 was just the rehearsal. The machine is shaking. The warning lights are flashing red, and the final stage has already begun. Welcome to Fiscal Flare. When the average observer looks at the modern global economy, they see a landscape of chaotic fractures. They see inflation spiking unpredictably, debt clocks spinning out of control, and politicians locked in endless screaming debates. The prevailing narrative is one of incompetence, that if we simply elected the right leaders or passed the correct regulations, the turbulence would stabilize. But that belief is a dangerous illusion. What we are witnessing is not a mistake, nor is it a random series of unfortunate events. It is a rigid, mathematical pattern. We are watching a four-stage mechanism that is run on a strict schedule for 300 years, dismantling financial systems with terrifying precision. This cycle is not a theory, it is a historical constant. It plays out every single time a society makes the fatal decision to replace tangible value with debt. We saw this exact sequence decapitate the French monarchy. We saw it incinerate the savings of the German middle class in 1923. And now, if you listen closely to the hum of the American financial engine, you can hear the exact same gears grinding against each other. To understand why Stage 4 the collapse is inevitable, you have to stop looking at the symptoms. Ignore the stock market, ignore the job numbers. You must look at the engine itself. Because the financial machine we rely on today was never designed to last forever. It was designed, from its very inception, to consume itself. To see how it ends, we cannot look forward. We must look back. We must return to the moment the fuse was lit to a desperate king, a bankrupt nation, and a shadowy deal that fundamentally changed the world. To discover the blueprint of our current demise, we must abandon the modern skyline of New York or Washington. We must travel back through the fog of time to late 17th century Europe. The year is 1694. The location is London. But this is not the polished, wealthy metropolis of today. This is a city choking on coal smoke and desperation, the capital of a nation standing on the precipice of total ruin. King William III sits on the throne, but his crown is heavy with debt. He is locked in a brutal, grinding war against France, a conflict he physically cannot afford to fight. The royal treasury is hollow. The gold is gone. The traditional lenders, the goldsmiths and merchants who once propped up the monarchy have bolted their doors. They have seen the ledger, and they know the king is a bad bet. The nation faces not just defeat on the battlefield, but total insolvency at home. In this moment of paralyzed leadership, a shadow enters the court. He is not a general offering a new strategy, nor a duke offering soldiers. He is a Scottish financier named William Paterson. And he approaches the desperate king with a proposition that, to the ear of a 17th century man, sounds like absolute alchemy. Paterson makes an offer that defies the laws of physics. "I will lend you 1.2 million pounds, he claims. The king is listening. But there is a catch, a detail that changes history. Paterson does not possess 1.2 million pounds in gold. He does not have it in silver. He does not have it in land. What he has is something far more potent and far more dangerous, a concept. He proposes a trade. He will provide the funds the king needs to save his war. In exchange, he demands a royal charter. He asks for the exclusive license to print paper money, legal tender that is backed by nothing but the government's promise to pay it back. In essence, Paterson is asking for the legal right to counterfeit. He is proposing the alchemical transmutation of paper into value. On July 27, 1694, driven by the panic of war, the deal is signed. The Bank of England is born. In that precise second, the modern financial world takes its first breath. The first Stage 1 economy comes online. The immediate crisis is solved, the ships are paid for, the soldiers are fed, and the war continues. But embedded in the fine print of that charter was a mathematical cancer, a detail that most history books gloss over, yet it remains the single most important economic fact of our lives. Here is the trap. When the Bank of England created that 1.2 million pounds out of thin air, they created the principle. They birthed the money into existence to be used. But, as with all loans, they demanded interest in return. Pause and consider the terrifying simplicity of the mathematics at play. The money to pay the principal now exists. It is circulating in the economy. But the money to pay the interest does not exist. It was never created. It is a ghost. So, how does a nation pay interest on money that is the only money in existence? There is only one way. You must borrow more. You must return to the bank, request another loan to cover the interest of the first, and in doing so, you expand the debt. From the very first second of its existence, the system was mathematically insolvent. It was not a stable storage of value. It was a shark that had to keep swimming or die. It required constant exponential expansion just to stay alive. The debt wasn't a bug in the software, it was the fuel source. Stage 1 was complete. The machine was built. It hummed with the quiet, seductive promise of infinite wealth, and for a time, it worked beautifully. It built empires and funded conquests, right until the moment the bill came due. If stage 1 is the seduction, the intoxicating rush of free money, then stage 2 is the fever dream that inevitably follows. For a few fleeting decades, the Bank of England's grand experiment appeared to be a stroke of genius. The credit flowed like wine. The British Empire expanded its chest, fueled by a treasury that seemed to have no bottom. The printing press allowed for a golden age of commerce, exploration, and architecture. But the architects of this system had ignored the fundamental flaw in their design. Debt is a biological force. It grows organically, exponentially, and always faster than the physical economy that supports it. To keep the machine from stalling, the bankers had to shovel more coal into the furnace. They had to print more. And as any student of history knows, when you print currency without creating corresponding value, you do not generate wealth. You generate a hallucination. You create a bubble. By the year 1720, the streets of London were vibrating with a dangerous energy. The focal point of this mania was the South Sea Company, a government-backed trade monopoly that promised untold riches from the Americas. The details of the trade didn't matter. The narrative did. The stock price began to climb, defying gravity, defying logic, and defying the mathematical realities of the company's actual earnings. It was a frenzy that leveled the social hierarchy. In the coffee houses of Exchange Alley, lords rubbed shoulders with chimney sweeps. Maids gambled their wages alongside aristocrats. The skepticism of the British public evaporated, replaced by the religious conviction that the line on the chart would go up forever. The psychological gravity of the bubble was so immense that it pulled in the greatest mind of the era, Sir Isaac Newton. Newton was a man of cold, hard logic. He was the father of physics, the man who decoded gravity itself. Initially, he approached the market with caution. He bought in, made a handsome profit, and sensibly exited. But then he watched. He watched his friends, people with a fraction of his intellect, become millionaires overnight while he sat on the sidelines with his sensible gains. The biological impulse of greed overrode the intellectual fortress of his mind. He re-entered the market near the very peak, pouring his life's fortune into the machine. Then, the mathematics caught up. It always does. In the summer of 1720, the air went out of the room. The confidence that held the illusion together fractured. In a matter of weeks, the stock price collapsed. It didn't just dip, it disintegrated. Fortunes that had taken generations to build evaporated into the London fog overnight. Newton was ruined. He lost the modern equivalent of millions. Shattered and humiliated, the smartest man on earth left us with a quote that serves as the epitaph for every financial crash since: "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." This was stage 3, loss of control. The system had failed. The wealth was exposed as a phantom. But here is the most terrifying part of this history, the part that should make you look at your own wallet with suspicion. When the dust settled, the powers that be did not dismantle the machine. They did not outlaw the debt-based currency that had caused the catastrophe. They simply patched it up. They bailed out the system, hid the cracks, and exported the model. They convinced themselves that the error wasn't in the design, but in the management. So, the machine survived. It lay dormant, ticking away in the background of history, waiting for its next host. 200 years later, that same engine was switched on in the heart of Europe. But this time, the stakes would not be merely financial. When the cycle repeated in Germany, it wouldn't just take people's investments. It would come for their very survival. If the South Sea bubble was a warning shot fired across the bow of history, what happened next was the execution. We must jump forward through time, past the Industrial Revolution, to a nation broken by the weight of its own ambition. The year is 1909. The Great War is over, and Germany lies in ruins. But the Allies are not content with military victory. They demand financial servitude. They hand the defeated nation a bill for the war, 132 billion gold marks. In today's adjusted currency, that is a debt of $600 billion. It was an impossible sum, a mathematical death sentence designed to keep a superpower on its knees. Germany stood at a crossroads with two terrifying paths. Path 1, default on the debt, admit national bankruptcy, and face immediate economic collapse and potential invasion. Path 2, turn on the printing presses, dilute the currency, and pray that the velocity of money outruns the reality of the debt. They chose the printers. What followed is the most harrowing economic case study in the archive of human civilization. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly, a creeping sickness in the wallet of the common man. At the end of 1922, a loaf of bread in a Berlin bakery cost 160 marks. It was expensive, certainly, causing grumbles at the dinner table, but it was manageable. The currency still functioned as a tool of exchange. But the machine was hungry. To pay the foreign debts and fund the domestic government, the presses roared day and night. The supply of paper exploded, and the value of trust collapsed. 10 months later, that exact same loaf of bread did not cost 500 marks. It did not cost 1,000, it cost 200 billion marks. Pause for a moment and try to comprehend the magnitude of that number. That is not inflation. That is the death of value. That is the total evaporation of the contract between a government and its people. By November 1923, the exchange rate shattered reality, hitting 4.2 trillion marks to a single US dollar. Life in Germany became a surreal nightmare. The speed of the collapse was so violent that the mechanics of daily life broke down. Factory managers began paying their workers twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, because the money earned at 9:30 a.m. would lose half its value by lunch. Women used wheelbarrows not to carry bricks, but to carry the mountains of cash required to buy a week's worth of groceries. The most tragic victims were not the rich, who owned land and gold, nor the poor, who had nothing to lose. The victim was the middle class. Families who had done everything right, who had saved for generations, bought government bonds, and trusted the institutions, saw their entire life's work wiped out in a matter of weeks. A lifetime of savings could not buy a cup of coffee. This was stage 4, the reset. The currency died. The savings vanished. And from the ashes of that economic incineration, a desperate, radicalized anger began to rise. We all know what kind of political monsters crawl out of that level of desperation. But as you watch this, you are likely comforting yourself with a dangerous thought. You are looking at the grainy black and white footage of 1920s Europe and thinking, that was a century ago. That was a war-torn country. That cannot happen here. You are wrong. The geography has changed, but the mathematics have not. In 1971, the United States of America, the wealthiest, most stable superpower in history, made a decision that started the exact same clock ticking. This time, the trigger wasn't a war debt imposed by enemies. It was a choice. It was a deliberate severing of the last link between our money and reality. The fuse that blew up Germany has been threaded into the foundation of the American economy, and it has been burning for 50 years. The pivot point of modern history occurred on a quiet Sunday evening, August 15, 1971. Across the United States, millions of families were settled in their living rooms, bathed in the glow of their television sets when the programming was abruptly interrupted. President Richard Nixon appeared on the screen, his expression grave, to announce a new economic policy. He framed it carefully. He called it a temporary measure designed to stabilize the economy. But behind the diplomatic language, a catastrophic event was taking place. Nixon announced the suspension of the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. To the average viewer, it sounded like technical jargon. In reality, it was a default. For decades, the global economy had rested on a promise that the US dollar was as good as gold. Foreign nations held dollars because they could, at any moment, exchange them for physical bullion from the US Treasury. But Washington had broken the cardinal rule of banking. To fund the sprawling costs of the Vietnam War and the ambitious social programs of the Great Society, the government had printed far more paper receipts than it had gold in the vault. Smart nations, particularly France, had done the math. They realized the check was about to bounce. They began aggressively demanding their gold back, draining the American vaults at a terrifying speed. Nixon didn't have the gold to pay them, so he simply locked the doors. In that singular second, the Bretton Woods system, the financial architecture of the post-world, died on live television. The US dollar ceased to be a receipt for value and became a pure fiat currency. It was no longer backed by metal, it was backed by nothing but a government promise and the implicit threat of American military force. The tether to reality was cut. Stage 2 of the cycle kicked in immediately. If you lived through the subsequent decade, you know that inflation is too soft a word for what happened. It was a systemic degradation of the American way of life. The stability of the 1960s, where inflation sat at a negligible 1% and unemployment at 5%, vanished into the ether. By 1974, inflation had roared to 12%. By the summer of 1980, it peaked at a suffocating 14.5%. The psychological impact was devastating. In less than 10 years, the most powerful currency on earth lost 1/3 of its purchasing power. The economy was paralyzed, caught in the vice grip of stagflation. This was stage 3 knocking on the door. The system was spiraling toward the same abyss that swallowed Weimar Germany. To stop the freefall, the Federal Reserve was forced to deploy a nuclear option. Chairman Paul Volcker jacked interest rates up to nearly 20%. It was a brutal, calculated demolition of demand. It crushed businesses, decimated the housing market, and forced the country into a punishing recession, all to save the dollar from total extinction. But here is the crucial question, the anomaly in the pattern. Why didn't the United States collapse? Why didn't we see wheelbarrows of cash and total social disintegration like Germany in 1923? The answer lies in a unique American superpower, the reserve currency status. Because every other nation needed dollars to buy oil and conduct trade, the United States had the unique ability to export its inflation to the rest of the world. We could print money to pay our bills, and when that money flooded the system, it didn't just stay in Ohio or New York, it flowed into the central banks of Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Europe. We forced other nations to eat our debt. We bought ourselves time, but we did not fix the problem. We simply took a national bubble and inflated it into a global one. We kicked the can down the road, but the road has now run out. The timeline is complete. The mathematics have run their course. And if you look at the scoreboard today, you will see that the grace period is over. We have entered the final phase. Let us pause the history lesson and look at the cold, hard instrument panel of the present. If we strip away the political rhetoric and the cable news noise, what does the financial scoreboard actually say? The timeline we have traced is not random, it is following the script to the letter. Stage 1. The foundation was laid in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve and weaponized in 1971 when Nixon severed the gold standard. The dollar was successfully transformed from a store of value into a debt-based instrument backed by nothing but faith. Check. Stage 2. Expansion has been running hot for 50 years. Since that Sunday evening in 1971, the U.S. national debt did not merely grow, it went supernova. It expanded from a manageable $370 billion to a grotesque $305 trillion today. That is not natural growth. That is a 94-fold increase. Globally, the picture is even bleaker, with total debt standing at a staggering $318 trillion, 3 times the size of the entire global economy. The consequence of this expansion is invisible to the eye but fatal to the wallet. The U.S. dollar has silently bled out 97% of its purchasing power since the system began. That is verified, empirical fact. This brings us to where we stand right now, stage 3, loss of control. We saw the opening tremors in 2022 when inflation surged to over 9%. But if you are fixated on the price of eggs or gas, you are missing the Leviathan swimming beneath the surface. The scariest number in the American economy is not inflation, it is the cost of the debt itself. The United States government is now paying over $892 billion a year just in interest payments. Let that number sink into your consciousness. $892 billion. That is money that buys nothing. It builds no bridges, educates no children, and heals no sick. It is simply the fee for being broke. To put that into terrifying perspective, we are now spending more on interest payments than we spend on the entire United States military. Think about the scale of the American war machine, the aircraft carriers, the fighter jets, the bases across the globe, the salaries of every soldier and Marine. It is the largest, most expensive organization in human history. And yet, the cost of our past financial sins has now eclipsed it. We are spending more to pay off old money than we are on defending the nation itself. This creates a mathematical paradox, a trap from which there is no escape. The Federal Reserve is now a prisoner of its own creation. Consider their position. If they raise interest rates to fight inflation, they increase the cost of that debt. If rates go too high, the interest payments balloon to $1.5 trillion or $2 trillion, consuming the entire federal tax revenue and bankrupting the government overnight. But if they lower interest rates to save the government from bankruptcy, they unleash the liquidity floodgates. Inflation explodes, the dollar loses the last 3% of its value, and the currency is destroyed. It is checkmate. There is no good exit. There is no mathematical way to pay this back. The engine is redlining. You can feel the vibrations in the culture itself. Rising social unrest, historic levels of political polarization, and the total collapse of public trust in institutions are not isolated cultural phenomena. They are the classic, textbook symptoms of a stage 3 economy nearing the cliff. The pressure is building, and the valve is welded shut. This brings us to the final chapter. Stage 4, the reset. Here is the brutal truth that no politician will utter into a microphone. The financial system we rely on is not designed to be fixed. It is designed to die. This is not a prophecy of doom. It is an observation of mechanics. I am not telling you the dollar will evaporate tomorrow morning. I am not saying society will dissolve into anarchy, but the mathematics are inescapable. When debt grows mathematically faster than the economy, when interest payments consume the entire discretionary budget, when the only available solution to a debt crisis is to issue more debt, the system will break. It always does. History does not repeat, but as the saying goes, it rhymes with terrifying precision. The only variable left is the method of execution. What will stage 4 look like in the 21st century? Will it be a firestorm of hyperinflation mirroring the wheelbarrows of Weimar Germany? Will it be a cold, hard sovereign default where the government simply refuses to pay, wiping out pension funds, 401ks, and the bond market in a single stroke? Or are we heading toward a more sophisticated dystopian solution, a managed transition to a new digital currency system, programmable money where the state can control exactly how, when, and where you spend your wealth? I do not claim to know the exact form the crash will take, but I know the pattern, and the pattern is absolute. There is a chorus of voices in the media who will tell you that this time is different. They will sell you the sedative of American exceptionalism. They will tell you that technology will save us, or that new economic theories like modern monetary theory can defy gravity forever. Do not listen to them. They are either ignorant of history or they are lying to keep you calm. The machine does not care about optimism. It does not care about political ideology. It cares only about math. And right now, the math is broken. 308 trillion in global debt, 305 trillion in US debt, central banks trapped in a cage of their own making, public trust collapsing. These are not opinions. These are the coordinates of a crash. So, what do you do when you are standing inside a building and you realize the foundation is turning to sand? When the realization hits, when the mathematics of the collapse become undeniable, the default human reaction is panic. It is a biological impulse. Most people, when faced with a stage 4 event, will freeze. They will sell their assets at the absolute bottom out of fear. They will buy at the top out of greed. Or they will bury their heads in the sand, frantically hoping that the government has a secret plan to save them. Do not be most people. You must understand a fundamental law of economics, one that applies to 1720 London as much as it applies to the modern day. Stage 4 is not the end of the world. It is a transfer. Wealth is never truly destroyed during a financial reset. It simply moves. It changes hands. It flows like water from the unprepared to the prepared. It flees from the realm of paper fantasy back to the realm of cold, hard reality. The collapse of a currency is the greatest opportunity in history for those who are holding the right bucket when the rain starts to fall. Here is your playbook for the transition. First, you must see the machine. You have to surgically detach yourself from the noise of the daily news cycle. Stop obsessing over the S&P 500. Stop watching the daily fluctuations of tech stocks. These are distractions. Instead, watch the debt. Watch the interest payments on the 10-year Treasury bond. Watch the currency index. Once you understand the pattern we have discussed, the 300-year cycle of debt and devaluation, the fear evaporates. It is replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. You are no longer gambling, you are reading a map. Second, and most importantly, you must exit the paper. The only assets that survive a stage 4 reset are the things that cannot be printed by a bureaucrat in a basement. When the fiat currency burns, value seeks refuge in scarcity. Real assets, productive farmland, precious metals, energy resources, essential commodities, tangible goods that have utility regardless of what the dollar is worth. These are the lifeboats. While the paper promises of the government catch fire, real value endures. It is the difference between owning a claim on wealth and owning the wealth itself. Third, you must stop waiting for a savior. This is the hardest psychological hurdle to clear. There is no politician coming to fix this. There is no central banker with a magic wand who can reverse 50 years of mathematical decay. The system is not broken. In the way a car is broken, it is doing exactly what it was mathematically designed to do, consume itself to facilitate a transfer of wealth. To expect the architects of the system to save you from the system is madness. The only person capable of securing your future, the only person who can build the ark before the flood, is you. We are told that 2008 was the crisis of our lifetime. It was not. 2008 was the warm-up. It was the tremor before the quake. The real event is still ahead of us on the horizon. But if you are watching this, you possess the one distinct advantage that millions of desperate souls in 1720, 1923, and 2008 did not have. You see it coming. The structural groans of the global economy are getting louder. The gears are grinding against each other, and the warning lights that began flickering in 1694 are now burning with a steady, blinding intensity. The machine is shaking because it has reached the end of its mathematical tolerance. But understanding how the machine breaks is only half the story. To stop there is to see only the mechanics of the disaster, not the intent behind it. To truly understand what happens next, to survive the transition from stage 3 to stage 4, you need to know who built this engine. You need to understand why it was designed with cold calculation to fail from the very beginning. There is a deeper layer to this history that we have not yet touched. A layer that explains why the coming wealth transfer is not an accident, but a feature. It is not a glitch, it is the harvest. I will be breaking down that final, terrifying layer in the next documentary. The next phase is inevitable. The mathematics cannot be bargained with. The only question left for you to answer is simple. When the dust settles on the greatest wealth transfer in human history, will you be the victim or will you be the beneficiary? If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe.